John Barrington Cowles by Arthur Conan Doyle. It might seem rash of me to say that I ascribe the death of my poor friend, John Barrington Cowles, to any preternatural agency. I am aware that in the present state of public feeling a chain of evidence would require to be strong indeed before the possibility of such a conclusion could be admitted. I shall therefore merely state the circumstances which led up to this sad event as concisely and as plainly as I can, and leave every reader to draw his own deductions. Perhaps there may be someone who can throw light upon what is dark to me. I first met Barrington Cowles when I went up to Edinburgh University to take out medical classes there. My landlady in Northumberland Street had a large house, and being a widow without children, she gained a livelihood by providing accommodation for several students. Barrington Cowles happened to have taken a bedroom upon the same floor as mine, and when we came to know each other better, we shared a small sitting room in which we took our meals. In this manner, we originated a friendship which was unmarred by the slightest disagreement up to the day of his death. Cowles' father was the colonel of a Sikh regiment and had remained in India for many years. He allowed his son a handsome income, but seldom gave any other sign of parental affection, writing irregularly and briefly. My friend, who had himself been born in India and whose whole disposition was an ardent tropical one, was much hurt by this neglect. His mother was dead, and he had no other relation in the world to supply the blank. Thus he came in time to concentrate all his affection upon me, and to confide in me in a manner which is rare among men. Even when a stronger and deeper passion came upon him, it never infringed upon the old tenderness between us. Cowles was a tall, slim young fellow, with an olive, Velasquez-like face and dark, tender eyes. I have seldom seen a man who is more likely to excite a woman's interest or to captivate her imagination. His expression was, as a rule, dreamy and even languid, but if in conversation a subject arose which interested him, he would be all animation in a moment. On such occasions his color would heighten, his eyes gleam, and he could speak with an eloquence which would carry his audience with him. In spite of these natural advantages, he led a solitary life, avoiding female society and reading with great diligence. He was one of the foremost men of his year, taking the Senior Medal for Anatomy and the Neil Arnott Prize for Physics. How well I can recollect the first time we met her. Often and often I have recalled the circumstances and tried to remember what the exact impression was which she produced on my mind at the time. After we came to know her, my judgment was warped, so that I am curious to recollect what my unbiased instincts were. It is hard, however, to eliminate the feelings which reason or prejudice afterwards raised in me. It was at the opening of the Royal Scottish Academy in the spring of 1879. My poor friend was passionately attached to art in every form, and a pleasing chord in music or a delicate effect upon canvas would give exquisite pleasure to his highly strung nature. We had gone together to see the pictures and were standing in the grand central salon when I noticed an extremely beautiful woman standing at the other side of the room. In my whole life I have never seen such a classically perfect countenance. It was the real Greek type, the forehead broad, very low, and as white as marble, with a cloudlet of delicate locks wreathing round it, the nose straight and clean cut, the lips inclined to thinness, the chin and lower jaw beautifully rounded off, and yet sufficiently developed to promise unusual strength of character. But those eyes, those wonderful eyes, if I could but give some faint idea of their varying moods, their steely hardness, their feminine softness, their power of command, their penetrating intensity suddenly melting away into an expression of womanly weakness, but I am speaking now of future impressions. There was a tall, yellow-haired young man with this lady, whom I at once recognized as a law student with whom I had a slight acquaintance. Archibald Reeves, for that was his name, was a dashing, handsome young fellow and had at one time been a ringleader in every university escapade, but of late I had seen little of him, and the report was that he was engaged to be married. His companion was, then, I presumed, his fiancée. I seated myself upon the velvet settee in the center of the room, and furtively watched the couple from behind my catalogue. The more I looked at her, the more her beauty grew upon me. She was somewhat short in stature, it is true, but her figure was perfection, and she bore herself in such a fashion that it was only by actual comparison that one would have known her to be under the medium height. As I kept my eyes upon them, Reeves was called away for some reason, and the young lady was left alone. Turning her back to the pictures, she passed the time until the return of her escort in taking a deliberate survey of the company, without paying the least heed to the fact that a dozen pair of eyes, attracted by her elegance and beauty, were bent curiously upon her. With one of her hands holding the red silk cord which railed off the pictures, she stood languidly moving her eyes from face to face with as little self-consciousness as if she were looking at the canvas creatures behind her. Suddenly, as I watched her, I saw her gaze become fixed, and, as it were, intense. I followed the direction of her looks, wondering what could have attracted her so strongly. John Barrington Cowles was standing before a picture, one, I think, by Noel Paton. I know that the subject was a noble and ethereal one. His profile was turned towards us, and never have I seen him to such advantage. I have said that he was a strikingly handsome man, but at that moment he looked absolutely magnificent. It was evident that he had momentarily forgotten his surroundings, and that his whole soul was in sympathy with the picture before him. His eyes sparkled, and a dusky pink shone through his clear olive cheeks. She continued to watch him fixedly, with a look of interest upon her face, until he came out of his reverie with a start, and turned abruptly round, so that his gaze met hers. She glanced away at once, but his eyes remained fixed upon her for some moments. The picture was forgotten already, and his soul had come down to earth once more. We caught sight of her once or twice before we left, and each time I noticed my friend look after her. He made no remark, however, until we got out into the open air and were walking arm-in-arm along Prince's Street. "Did you notice that beautiful woman in the dark dress with the white fur?" he asked. "Yes, I saw her," I answered. "Do you know her?" he asked eagerly. "Have you any idea who she is?" "I don't know her personally," I replied, "but I have no doubt I could find out all about her, for I believe she is engaged to young Archie Reeves, and he and I have a lot of mutual friends." "Engaged?" ejaculated Cowles. "Why, my dear boy," I said, laughing, "you don't mean to say you are so susceptible that the fact that a girl to whom you never spoke in your life is engaged is enough to upset you?" "Well, not exactly to upset me," he answered, forcing a laugh, "but I don't mind telling you, Armitage, that I never was so taken by anyone in my life. It wasn't the mere beauty of the face, though that was perfect enough, but it was the character and the intellect upon it. I hope, if she is engaged, that it is to some man who will be worthy of her." "Why," I remarked, "you speak quite feelingly. It is a clear case of love at first sight, Jack. However, to put your perturbed spirit at rest, I'll make a point of finding out all about her whenever I meet any fellow who is likely to know." Barrington Cowles thanked me, and the conversation drifted off into other channels. For several days neither of us made any allusion to the subject, though my companion was perhaps a little more dreamy and distraught than usual. The incident had almost vanished from my remembrance, when one day young Brodie, who is a second cousin of mine, came up to me on the university steps with the face of a bearer of tidings. "I say," he began, "you know Reeves, don't you?" "Yes, what of him?" "His engagement is off." "Off?" I cried. "Why, I only learned the other day that it was on." "Oh yes, it's all off. His brother told me so. Deucedly mean of Reeves, you know, if he has backed out of it, for she was an uncommonly nice girl." "I've seen her," I said, "but I don't know her name." "She is a Miss Northcott, and lives with an old aunt of hers in Abercrombie Place. Nobody knows anything about her people or where she comes from. Anyhow, she is about the most unlucky girl in the world, poor soul." "Why unlucky?" "Well, you know, this was her second engagement," said young Brodie, who had a marvelous knack of knowing everything about everybody. "She was engaged to Prescott, William Prescott, who died. That was a very sad affair. The wedding day was fixed, and the whole thing looked as straight as a die when the smash came. What smash? I asked, with some dim recollection of the circumstances. Why, Prescott's death. He came to Abercrombie Place one night and stayed very late. No one knows exactly when he left, but about 1 in the morning, a fellow who knew him met him walking rapidly in the direction of the Queen's Park. He bade him good night, but Prescott hurried on without heeding him, and that was the last time he was ever seen alive. 3 days afterwards, his body was found floating in St. Margaret's Loch, under St. Anthony's Chapel. No one could ever understand it, but of course the verdict brought it in as temporary insanity. It was very strange, I remarked. Yes, and deucedly rough on the poor girl, said Brodie. Now that this other blow has come, it will quite crush her, so gentle and ladylike she is too. You know her personally, then? I asked. Oh yes, I know her. I have met her several times. I could easily manage that you should be introduced to her. Well, I answered, it's not so much for my own sake as for a friend of mine. However, I don't suppose she will go out much for some little time after this. When she does, I will take advantage of your offer. We shook hands on this, and I thought no more of the matter for some time. The next incident, which I have to relate as bearing at all upon the question of Miss Northcote, is an unpleasant one. Yet I must detail it as accurately as possible, since it may throw some light upon the sequel. One cold night, several months after the conversation with my second cousin, which I have quoted above, I was walking down one of the lowest streets in the city on my way back from a case which I had been attending. It was very late, and I was picking my way among the dirty loungers who were clustering round the doors of a great gin palace, when a man staggered out from among them and held out his hand to me with a drunken leer. The gaslight fell full upon his face, and to my intense astonishment, I recognized in the degraded creature before me my former acquaintance, young Archibald Reeves, who had once been famous as one of the most dressy and particular men in the whole college. I was so utterly surprised that for a moment I almost doubted the evidence of my own senses, but there was no mistaking those features, which, though bloated with drink, still retained something of their former comeliness. I was determined to rescue him, for one night at least, from the company into which he had fallen. "Hulloa, Reeves," I said. "Come along with me, I'm going in your direction." He muttered some incoherent apology for his condition and took my arm. As I supported him towards his lodgings, I could see that he was not only suffering from the effects of a recent debauch, but that a long course of intemperance had affected his nerves and his brain. His hand, when I touched it, was dry and feverish, and he started from every shadow which fell upon the pavement. He rambled in his speech, too, in a manner which suggested the delirium of disease rather than the talk of a drunkard. When I got him to his lodgings, I partially undressed him and laid him upon his bed. His pulse at this time was very high, and he was evidently extremely feverish. He seemed to have sunk into a doze, and I was about to steal out of the room to warn his landlady of his condition, when he started up and caught me by the sleeve of my coat. "Don't go," he cried. "I feel better when you are here. I am safe from her then." "From her," I said. "From whom?" Her, he answered peevishly. "Ah, you don't know her. She is the devil, beautiful, beautiful, but the devil." "You are feverish and excited," I said. "Try and get a little sleep. You will wake better." "Sleep," he groaned. "How am I to sleep when I see her sitting down yonder at the foot of the bed, with her great eyes watching and watching hour after hour? I tell you it saps all the strength and manhood out of me. That's what makes me drink. God help me, I'm half drunk now." "You are very ill," I said, putting some vinegar to his temples, "and you are delirious. You don't know what you say." "Yes, I do," he interrupted sharply, looking up at me. "I know very well what I say. I brought it upon myself. It is my own choice. But I couldn't, no, by heaven, I couldn't accept the alternative. I couldn't keep my faith to her. It was more than man could do." I sat by the side of the bed, holding one of his burning hands in mine and wondering over his strange words. He lay still for some time, and then, raising his eyes to me, said in a most plaintive voice, "Why did she not give me warning sooner? Why did she wait until I had learned to love her so?" He repeated this question several times, rolling his feverish head from side to side, and then he dropped into a troubled sleep. I crept out of the room, and having seen that he would be properly cared for, left the house. His words, however, rang in my ears for days afterwards, and assumed a deeper significance when taken with what was to come. My friend, Barrington Cowles, had been away for his summer holidays, and I had heard nothing of him for several months. When the winter session came on, however, I received a telegram from him asking me to secure the old rooms in Northumberland Street for him and telling me the train by which he would arrive. I went down to meet him and was delighted to find him looking wonderfully hearty and well. "By the way," he said suddenly that night, as we sat in our chairs by the fire, talking over the events of the holidays, "you have never congratulated me yet." "On what, my boy?" I asked. "What, do you mean to say you have not heard of my engagement?" "Engagement, no," I answered. "However, I am delighted to hear it and congratulate you with all my heart." "I wonder it didn't come to your ears," he said. "It was the queerest thing. You remember that girl whom we both admired so much at the academy?" "What?" I cried, with a vague feeling of apprehension at my heart. "You don't mean to say that you are engaged to her?" "I thought you would be surprised," he answered. "When I was staying with an old aunt of mine in Peterhead, in Aberdeenshire, the Northcotes happened to come there on a visit, and as we had mutual friends, we soon met. I found out that it was a false alarm about her being engaged, and then, well, you know what it is when you are thrown into the society of such a girl in a place like Peterhead. Not, mind you," he added, "that I consider I did a foolish or hasty thing. I have never regretted it for a moment. The more I know Kate, the more I admire her and love her. However, you must be introduced to her, and then you will form your own opinion." I expressed my pleasure at the prospect, and endeavored to speak as lightly as I could to Cowles upon the subject, but I felt depressed and anxious at heart. The words of Reeves and the unhappy fate of young Prescott recurred to my recollection, and though I could assign no tangible reason for it, a vague, dim fear and distrust of the woman took possession of me. It may be that this was foolish prejudice and superstition upon my part, and that I involuntarily contorted her future doings and sayings to fit into some half-formed wild theory of my own. This has been suggested to me by others as an explanation of my narrative. They are welcome to their opinion if they can reconcile it with the facts which I have to tell. I went round with my friend a few days afterwards to call upon Miss Northcote. I remember that, as we went down Abercrombie Place, our attention was attracted by the shrill yelping of a dog, which noise proved eventually to come from the house to which we were bound. We were shown upstairs, where I was introduced to old Mrs. Merton, Miss Northcote's aunt, and to the young lady herself. She looked as beautiful as ever, and I could not wonder at my friend's infatuation. Her face was a little more flushed than usual, and she held in her hand a heavy dog whip, with which she had been chastising a small Scotch terrier, whose cries we had heard in the street. The poor brute was cringing up against the wall, whining piteously and evidently completely cowed. "So, Kate," said my friend, after we had taken our seats, "you have been falling out with Carlo again." "Only a very little quarrel this time," she said, smiling charmingly. "He is a dear good old fellow, but he needs correction now and then." Then, turning to me, "We all do that, Mr. Armitage, don't we? What a capital thing if, instead of receiving a collective punishment at the end of our lives, we were to have one at once, as the dogs do when we did anything wicked. It would make us more careful, wouldn't it?" I acknowledged that it would. Supposing that every time a man misbehaved himself, a gigantic hand were to seize him, and he were lashed with a whip until he fainted. She clenched her white fingers as she spoke, and cut out viciously with the dog whip. It would do more to keep him good than any number of high-minded theories of morality. "Why, Kate," said my friend, "you are quite savage today." "No, Jack," she laughed. "I'm only propounding a theory for Mr. Armitage's consideration." The two began to chat together about some Aberdeenshire reminiscence, and I had time to observe Mrs. Merton, who had remained silent during our short conversation. She was a very strange-looking old lady. What attracted attention most in her appearance was the utter want of color which she exhibited. Her hair was snow-white, and her face extremely pale. Her lips were bloodless, and even her eyes were of such a light tinge of blue that they hardly relieved the general pallor. Her dress was a grey silk, which harmonized with her general appearance. She had a peculiar expression of countenance, which I was unable at the moment to refer to its proper cause. She was working at some old-fashioned piece of ornamental needlework, and as she moved her arms her dress gave forth a dry, melancholy rustling, like the sound of leaves in the autumn. There was something mournful and depressing in the sight of her. I moved my chair a little nearer, and asked her how she liked Edinburgh and whether she had been there long. When I spoke to her, she started and looked up at me with a scared look on her face. Then I saw in a moment what the expression was which I had observed there. It was one of fear, intense and overpowering fear. It was so marked that I could have staked my life on the woman before me, having at some period of her life been subjected to some terrible experience or dreadful misfortune. "Oh yes, I like it," she said in a soft, timid voice, "and we have been here long, that is, not very long. We move about a great deal." She spoke with hesitation, as if afraid of committing herself. "You are a native of Scotland, I presume," I said. "No, that is, not entirely. We are not natives of any place. We are cosmopolitan, you know." She glanced round in the direction of Miss Northcote as she spoke, but the two were still chatting together near the window. Then she suddenly bent forward to me with a look of intense earnestness upon her face and said, "Don't talk to me any more, please. She does not like it, and I shall suffer for it afterwards. Please don't do it." I was about to ask her the reason for this strange request, but when she saw I was going to address her, she rose and walked slowly out of the room. As she did so, I perceived that the lovers had ceased to talk, and that Miss Northcote was looking at me with her keen, grey eyes. "You must excuse my aunt, Mr. Armitage," she said. "She is odd and easily fatigued. Come over and look at my album." We spent some time examining the portraits. Miss Northcote's father and mother were apparently ordinary mortals enough, and I could not detect in either of them any traces of the character which showed itself in their daughter's face. There was one old daguerreotype, however, which arrested my attention. It represented a man of about the age of 40 and strikingly handsome. He was clean-shaven, and extraordinary power was expressed upon his prominent lower jaw and firm, straight mouth. His eyes were somewhat deeply set in his head, however, and there was a snake-like flattening at the upper part of his forehead, which detracted from his appearance. I almost involuntarily, when I saw the head, pointed to it and exclaimed, "There is your prototype in your family, Miss Northcote." "Do you think so?" she said. "I am afraid you are paying me a very bad compliment. Uncle Anthony was always considered the black sheep of the family." "Indeed," I answered, "my remark was an unfortunate one then." "Oh, don't mind that," she said. "I always thought myself that he was worth all of them put together. He was an officer in the 41st Regiment, and he was killed in action during the Persian War, so he died nobly at any rate." "That's the sort of death I should like to die," said Cowles, his dark eyes flashing, as they would when he was excited. "I often wish I had taken to my father's profession instead of this vile pill-compounding drudgery." "Come, Jack, you are not going to die any sort of death yet," she said, tenderly taking his hand in hers. I could not understand the woman. There was such an extraordinary mixture of masculine decision and womanly tenderness about her, with the consciousness of something all her own in the background, that she fairly puzzled me. I hardly knew, therefore, how to answer Cowles when, as we walked down the street together, he asked the comprehensive question, "Well, what do you think of her?" "I think she is wonderfully beautiful," I answered guardedly. "That, of course," he replied irritably. "You knew that before you came." "I think she is very clever too," I remarked. Barrington Cowles walked on for some time, and then he suddenly turned on me with the strange question. "Do you think she is cruel? Do you think she is the sort of girl who would take a pleasure in inflicting pain?" "Well, really," I answered, "I have hardly had time to form an opinion." We then walked on for some time in silence. "She is an old fool," at length muttered Cowles. "She is mad." "Who is?" I asked. Why that old woman, that aunt of Kate's, Mrs. Merton, or whatever her name is? Then I knew that my poor colorless friend had been speaking to Cowles, but he never said anything more as to the nature of her communication. My companion went to bed early that night, and I sat up a long time by the fire, thinking over all that I had seen and heard. I felt that there was some mystery about the girl, some dark fatality so strange as to defy conjecture. I thought of Prescott's interview with her before their marriage and the fatal termination of it. I coupled it with poor drunken Reeves' plaintive cry, "Why did she not tell me sooner?" and with the other words he had spoken. Then my mind ran over Mrs. Merton's warning to me, Cowles' reference to her, and even the episode of the whip and the cringing dog. The whole effect of my recollections was unpleasant to a degree, and yet there was no tangible charge which I could bring against the woman. It would be worse than useless to attempt to warn my friend until I had definitely made up my mind what I was to warn him against. He would treat any charge against her with scorn. What could I do? How could I get at some tangible conclusion as to her character and antecedents? No one in Edinburgh knew them except as recent acquaintances. She was an orphan, and as far as I knew, she had never disclosed where her former home had been. Suddenly an idea struck me. Among my father's friends, there was a Colonel Joyce, who had served a long time in India upon the staff, and who would be likely to know most of the officers who had been out there since the mutiny. I sat down at once, and having trimmed the lamp, proceeded to write a letter to the colonel. I told him that I was very curious to gain some particulars about a certain Captain Northcott, who had served in the 41st Foot, and who had fallen in the Persian War. I described the man as well as I could from my recollection of the daguerreotype, and then, having directed the letter, posted it that very night, after which, feeling that I had done all that could be done, I retired to bed, with a mind too anxious to allow me to sleep.